You're locked into the only podcast for Maine High School Basketball. The biggest names, past and present. It's Big Time Hoops, the podcast, right now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Big Time Hoops, the podcast. And we're keeping the big timers rolling. We got Zak Ray, Bangor Ram, great. Later on to what? Bates, right? Bates, great. And I think we might even have a couple Noonan championships too, right? The Noonan basketball tournament. I think you got some chips in that.
Yeah, I think it's 2, could have been 3, but we ran out of steam. It's a grueling weekend, that Noonan weekend.
Absolutely. So we'll talk about all that. But I didn't even get a chance to ask before we came on. So I mentioned Bangor grad, but where you at now anyway?
Yeah, so I'm in Boston. I've been down here ever since I got out of college in 2007. I'm working for a private equity fund, and I've been with the company for 11 years. So it's been a pretty good run here.
You get back home at all? You pretty much just down there all the time?
Yeah, no, I still have family up there. Most of my family's in the Waterville area, central Maine area. And then I've got a brother down in Texas and a sister up in Bangor.
All over the place.
Yeah.
Just real quick before we dive back into it and go back and relive some moments past. What's your last basketball moment? Are you still hooping at all? Or like, have you hung up the shoes? Like, what was it?
Oh, well, it's interesting. So recently, I think COVID's put me into retirement. I was hooping pretty regularly. I felt like, if I wasn't, at my peak, I was peaking somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Even at, 35. But I haven't played since COVID started.
I think that's how most of us are too. I haven't touched the ball since March, and I think I might be done. I think it might be time to just hang it up and move on. But
yeah, it's more the risk for me. I don't want to be in a big group of 10, 20 people playing pickup hoops right now, and there are no leagues.
Yeah.
So I've gone out and gotten shots up, but it's not the same. You don't get that competitive flair. The juices don't get flowing like they would if you're playing 5-on-5.
Exactly. So talking about competitive juices, let's go back because I got a bunch of stuff I want to ask you about because you played at a really great time with a bunch of really great players, a bunch of great teams, and we get to touch on all that. So we'll go back to the beginning. Bangor, Maine, born and raised for you or what?
No, I was a military brat. I was born in Alabama, but my mom is from Maine. So she, at one point in time, got sent to Korea. She sent me up to Maine. I lived with her family for a few years early in life. We bounced around a bit after she got back. We were in North Carolina for a little while. We were in Texas for a little while. But I call Maine home. I spent elementary school at Winslow. And then I went to Texas in middle school, came back 8th grade or so. And I was in Winslow my freshman year and then transferred to Bangor sophomore through senior year.
This is all stuff I didn't know over here. This is good. I couldn't find a bio anywhere, so this is all new. So this is good. So a lot of times where we grow up, it kind of shapes who we are as basketball players, whether it's the people we watch or just the style of play and stuff like that. Where you bounced around, like what was your basketball upbringing like? What was your basketball education to kind of get you ready for high school?
Yeah, so the Central Maine basketball scene was great. I had a blast playing with the Winslow travel teams. I had great coaches and really good friends and teammates. And the competition was great. The Waterville teams were really good. We had great battles with those guys, Ryan Lockhart and Mike Dennis, and there were a bunch of other guys that were in our grade that were really good. Skowhegan had good teams. They had RJ Anzelk. They had Derek Holt, Dom Susi, Sam Height. I actually wound up playing AAU. We did a Winslow Skowhegan AAU team for a few years in there. The Winthrop teams were awesome. I think they wound up winning a state championship. All those guys. So Skowhegan won a state championship in the time that we were in high school. Who else won? Winthrop won a state championship, and Winslow won a state championship even without me. We were set to have some really good teams. We thought we were going to win 3 state championships at Winslow while I was there. And they wound up getting one anyway. So, I was really happy for those guys. But I'd say I was just one of the guys. I was just one of the guys in my own head, at least. Maybe people thought that I was good, but to me, I was just another player on the team who was trying to win games. And I was always small. I was tiny. Up until I moved to Texas, I was the smallest guy, moved there, hit a huge growth spurt, and came back. And I was, my height, 5'10", when a lot of guys still hadn't hit their growth spurts when I moved back to Maine. So I went from being the smallest to one of the bigger guys. I thought I was going to be 6'4", and it never happened.
That was kind of it right there, peaked early.
Yeah.
Where you kind of bounced around and you weren't really necessarily raised in Maine, like what was your familiarity with the high school basketball scene? Because like a lot of us, we grew up in the same town. We were like the guys in front of us. We want to be like them. But like where you kind of bounced around, what did you know about Maine high school basketball prior to actually playing Maine high school basketball?
Very little. I knew more about the girls. I had an aunt who was into hoops. So I'd always be at like the Lawrence Winslow games because Cindy Blodgett was great, but Winslow had good teams too. So I'd be, one of the little kids running around on the court for the girls games. And we never watched the boys play because the Winslow boys were nothing to write home about when I was younger. So, I didn't pay much attention to Maine boys hoops. I had heard of certain guys, the Tommy Watermans. I knew about Pills. I knew about Salvaggio. But I didn't know, which teams were the best teams or anything like that.
Okay. But you mentioned travel hoops, so I'm guessing you got to kind of get to know these kids pretty quickly, right? So if you're playing travel ball, you're kind of going up against some of these other kids from around the state at a young age, right? So I'm guessing you kind of got to know them quickly, I'm guessing, right? Like once you got on the scene.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was in Winslow from 2nd grade to 6th grade and then, moved back again in 8th grade. So I knew the local basketball scene, but, there's a guy up in Newport, Ryan McClellan.
I got to talk to you about him. He's going to come up later on.
Who I had some amazing battles with. But the first time I ran into Ryan McClellan was in 6th grade at the Gilman Street Gym in Waterville. Newport, I don't know what they might have called themselves Nokomis at that point in time, came down and we were playing in a tournament. We played in the finals and we went to double overtime and there was a buzzer beater. I don't even remember if we beat them or they beat us. I'm guessing we beat them. But that was the first time I played against Ryan, and coming into the game, the coaches told me, hey, they think this kid's the best player in the state in the grade. You're going to have your hands full, or we're going to have our hands full. And we did.
Yeah, like I said, I want to talk about him a little bit later on because that's one name who hasn't come up at all. But like I've dealt with him in his adult life, in men's leagues and stuff like that, and dude is a problem. So you mentioned once you got to high school, you were already 5'10", you had a little bit of a growth spurt. What was the weight on you at that time? Because you weren't a very big guy. I'm guessing you were probably like 5'10", like buck 30, buck 40?
My freshman year, yeah, buck 35. You're right on.
Yeah. And any adjustment to the high school level? Every time you jump a level in competition, there's always an adjustment, whether it's the speed of the game or physicality. What was it for you once you actually started playing high school hoops?
Yeah, well, when I came back from Texas, I had a huge improvement in my game. I was playing every day down there. I was playing against men. They had me on the men's team on the Air Force base I was on. And my game just took a step up. So when I came back, I was more prepared to play at a higher level. So that jump from middle school to high school, it was still big because, the kids play a lot harder than the men do. The up and down, the pace of the game is fast. Yeah. But I would say I was nervous in the beginning. I played on the varsity team at Winslow the summer leading into my freshman year, and I wasn't expecting to. They kind of just threw me in there. And I competed. I, didn't stand out in any sort of way. But, the next thing I knew, I was starting on the varsity team as a freshman. And it was sort of a whole new world.
What do you remember most about that freshman year? Anything that kind of stands out? Like a game or a play?
Losing regularly. I think we were, what did we play? 18 games in a regular season back then. I think we were 6-12. We just missed the playoffs. And what stands out to me is the first game. My very first shot was this like floater in the middle of the lane. I had a sweet move to get into the lane and just bummed it off the backboard because I was so hyped up, so excited for the moment. Eventually my nerves calmed and I had some nice plays. And the next day there was a nice picture of me in the paper. And, I think that gave me a little bit of confidence leading into the rest of the season.
Okay.
But I will say I do remember the battles, particularly with the other freshman point guards. There were a couple other freshman point guards in the league or in Class B at the time. There was one at Erskine, Kenny DeMuth, and there was another guy up in Herman, Joey Schatt. Both of those guys made the playoffs that year. They went to the tournament. They went to play in Bangor. I went up to watch them, and I couldn't help being jealous and, wanting that moment for myself. And, I was overlooked for some postseason awards, and it just fueled the fire.
You mentioned the auditorium and going to watch those guys play. Was that your first auditorium experience, or did you go there growing up as well to catch tournament games?
Yeah, when I was young, I went to go see a Lawrence game, and that was my first experience there. But as an older kid, that was my first auditorium experience, and I needed to get there as a player.
Yeah. And obviously you guys did. You did later on, so that's where we're heading next. So you made the move to Bangor. What was the reason behind the move? Just the family settling down, or?
Yeah, well, my parents had already moved. They had already moved up to Bangor, but I was stubborn. I wanted to stay in Winslow with the guys I had relationships with and
right.
learn the game with, right? And I wanted to win championships there. I wanted to play football at Winslow High School. So I was living with my grandparents, and then, my family just made the decision that I needed to move up to Bangor, or actually we were living in Holden. I got a funny story about how I wound up at Bangor.
All right.
But, so I was reluctant. I didn't want to go. Bangor had actually won the state championship my freshman year while I was at Winslow. I didn't know anything about the guys on the team or anything like that. I was wrapped up in the Class B scene.
Yeah.
So there was no great story about why, it wasn't like the Bangor basketball team attracted me, or Coach Reed reached out to me, or, anything like that. My family was up there, and I couldn't hold out any longer.
There were some worse places you could have landed, though. It's not a bad place to land at.
Well, yeah. So it's funny. So I move up there, and I'm all pissed off that I got to go up there. And I need to play hoops. I got to find some place to play, and I got to figure out, which high school I'm going to go to, because I lived in a town where you have a choice. So the first place I went actually was Hamden.
Oh.
And I show up to the high school, and all the doors are locked. No one's inside. So I leave. I go to Bangor High School. Doors are open. I walk in. Coach Reed's not there, but there's a janitor there who says, oh, hey, he's over at like Fifth Street School doing something with the kids, like running a clinic for elementary school kids. So I pop over there, walk in, introduce myself to Coach Reed. He doesn't know me from a hole in the wall. And next thing I know, I'm working the clinic, and, I'm playing hoops in the Bangor Hoops Clinic as well. And it just happened to be Hamden was locked and Bangor was open.
Simple as that?
There, yeah.
Wow. Okay. And that was your first interaction with Coach Reed. And I haven't had a chance to talk to anybody about Coach Reed yet. You're the first Bangor guy to come on. So obviously Coach Reed, quite successful. I think I was doing a little bit of research. So before that you got there, they won 3 in the 90s, and then they won the Gold Ball in 2000. So obviously an established program, an established coach. What's a Coach Reed program? What was the Coach Reed Bangor program like walking into it?
Well, I didn't really have a grasp for it until tryouts. Because the summertime is a little bit it's unstructured. So the varsity guys don't really show up to the Bangor Hoops program, or they didn't really show up to the Bangor Hoops program at that point in time. And it's not because they didn't want to play hoops. A lot of them at Bangor, guys play 3 sports. So there are a lot of folks who are playing baseball during the summertime, and they just show up for the summer league basketball games at nighttime. And at that point in time, I wasn't invited. So I only got to do the afternoon. I only got to do the afternoon stuff. they definitely, they didn't treat me like I was some big player coming in. The first day I was there, or the second day, there was some buzz around me showing up. Then they sent the kid who his name is Miles Levy, apparently locked down Derek Rogerson the year before. Derek Rogerson was a really good scorer. So they bring Miles in to D me up. And I mean, he just tortured me for a whole afternoon. And so I'm sitting here like, am I even going to make the varsity team? I'm working my tail off. Tryouts come around. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Joe Campbell did take me under his wing. So during the fall, I didn't play football. And Joe and I were in the gym every day. And he was like a big brother to me. He really helped me progress and learn how to, sort of be a champion. I was always super competitive. We play one-on-one all the time. I think I beat him twice the whole fall. And I'm talking, we'd be there every day for a few hours. So trials come around and there are 80 kids in the gym, 80 kids trying out for the Bangor boys basketball team. Winslow, I don't think we even made cuts. So that was eye-opening, just that many people were interested in being on the team.
Right.
And just the structure was something that I hadn't experienced to that point in time. Coach Reed runs a really tight ship. He's a no BS sort of guy. And he's also a brilliant basketball mind, and not in a way that he's trying to teach you really elaborate things. He makes some very complicated things very simple, and he coaches to his team. He doesn't have a set, like, this is how things are done. He makes adjustments on the fly, and he expects people to be able to execute. He was tremendous, and he was not easy on me. I mean, he had his way with me a bunch of times, and I deserved all of them.
So I could picture him right now. This picture, maybe just the image in my head, but I could picture him on the sidelines during tryouts with a clipboard, maybe making some notes. You never said looking over there, wondering what he's writing down. What was it actually like when you found out you made the team? Like, it was like a list in the locker room. You had to go and like check it out.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. That's what it was, man. I was questioning it to the friends I had made to that point in time. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be on there. Like, you're crazy. You're going to be on the team. You're going to be on varsity. You don't even need to look at it. But in my head, I have a lot to prove. It's not like Coach Reed was telling me how great I was and how big a part of the team. Like, he wasn't recruiting me in any sort of way. Right. Like, it was like, if you want to be a part of the team, go work your tail off, and maybe we got a spot for you. Thankfully it worked out in my favor.
So I got a question for you. So I had one of the current Bangor boys on earlier this year, Andrew Swez, and I asked him, I said, whenever you walk by the trophy case, do you know how many gold balls are in there? Like, I'm thinking that's something you should be aware of, because it's such a proud tradition program and stuff like that. So whenever you were there, when you walked by the trophy case, did you know off the top of your head or just by memory how many gold balls were in there?
At the time, yes. Now, no. I think the number, because Coach Reed had a gold ball with multiple levels to it. So he had the gold ball. Then at the base, he had the original state championships that they won. So there was one on each side. So he had at least 4. And then there was a second level with placards on each of the sides. And then it was the ball on top. So it was like a 3-layered cake.
But I'm guessing that's just the expectation, right? I'm guessing like that's the program you came into. It was like, we're here to win gold. We're here to win gold balls. We're here to win state championships.
Yeah, I think that was the expectation going into my sophomore year. The team had a lot of returners. There were 4 seniors that started. I started most games. There were 2 where Coach didn't start me, and I think he was just trying to send a message. And it's not like I was a knucklehead or anything like that. I think, one of the games was against Bucksport. Bucksport had a really good point guard, this kid, Jason Harvey.
Another kid I wanted to talk to you about today. You're bringing him up before I have a chance here.
So Coach Reed benches me, or has me come off the bench for the game against Bucksport, which is a game I was really looking forward to. because, everyone had said Jason Harvey was the best point guard in the state, and I wanted a piece of him. And I think Coach Reed sort of sensed that I was really juiced up for the game. Jason, by the way, is a great kid, really quiet guy. I got to play against him in AAU a little bit, played up on their team a little bit. But I was looking forward to that challenge, and I was surprised when I was coming off the bench. But it was just something that he did to, give other guys a chance, and also to, have me, whatever he wanted me to think about that decision.
What's the
a
name
little bit of Phil Jackson to him.
What's the name of the gym in Bangor? Is it Redberry or something like that?
Redberry Gymnasium.
What's Redberry Gymnasium like on a Friday night Bangor home game? I'm guessing it's a little bit different than what you're used to your freshman year. What was that environment like? I'm guessing you guys had great crowds.
We got some really good crowds. I mean, we had good rivalries. Hamden was supposed to be better than us every year. They had bigger guys, and they had as much, if not more, talent. Brewer was really good. They had some very good teams. They actually beat us one of the years. Nokomis had really good teams. So, they had great community support. We had great community support. If you were a fan and you didn't get there for halftime of the JV game, you weren't getting into the game. That's just the way it worked. There'd be a lot. We would show up. Our bus would arrive, if it was an away game, say at Brewer. And the fans would be lined up out the door before the JV game started. It was just one of those, times where I don't know if it's still like that, but, people were really rallying behind the hoops teams. And the games were battles. And Redberry was great. You got stands on one side, then you got a court, then you got a couple courts off to the other side. So the fans are only on one side. But it can seat 1,000 people, and a lot of nights we pack the place.
So not only are you trying to acclimate yourself to a new team, but the team you're playing on has a huge bullseye on their back, being the defending state champs. So you mentioned the rivalries, but I'm guessing people came at you guys harder on top of that just because you guys were the defending state champs. So are there any moments that kind of stick out during that sophomore year in the run-up to the state championship game, like any defining moments or moments that maybe taught you some things or the team some things? Like what kind of sticks out leading up to the actual state championship game?
Well, the number one thing for me that year was don't screw it up. They gave me the keys, and, I'm a sophomore, new to the school, starting point guard. I had a pretty well-rounded game at that point in time, but I was really a facilitator, defender, and I kind of scored as needed. I wasn't a scorer by any means on that team. There were 9 seniors, and, I felt a lot of pressure not to screw things up. And I would say defining moments of the season were probably the losses. We had one win, so I'll give you 2 losses. One of them is the one that you talked about with Pilot. So we breezed through that tournament as well, and we found ourselves playing Valley in the championship game of a Christmas tournament.
Yeah.
And he was right. We had Nokomis the next day. We weren't thinking about it, though. I'm telling you, we were pretty juiced up for the Valley game. Because those guys hadn't lost, or we thought they hadn't lost. It was news to me that they lost to Winthrop. No one knew. So we're coming to that game, and the guys on the Bangor team are doing their tournament chants. We had these chants that we did, so I got introduced to that. They were all hyped up. We go out there, and they beat the brakes off us for the first 4 minutes of the game. You come out the game, you look at the scoreboard, and it's 20-something to low single digits, and there was no turning back from there. We played starters every 4 minutes after that, but it didn't matter. Yeah. They would have beaten us by 20, 30 points either way. We weren't ready for that one. They were good. They were better than us that night.
Was Nick barking in your ear?
Of course not.
No.
I don't know. Nick was never a trash talker to me. But I was definitely impressed by. I was surprised by his speed. I didn't think he was that fast just watching him. He shot the ball from deeper than I expected him to. But then the Twins were better than I expected, and they were faster. And then Andre was huge. And I don't think they had another basketball player other than those four guys.
That's all they needed.
But it was more than enough to take us down that night.
Yeah.
And then we turned around. So that one was, it was just a game that didn't count, right? It sucked to lose. The next night, we played Nokomis at Nokomis. And they beat us, and I played like crap. And Ryan, Ryan, I remembered him from 6th grade. It was the first time I'd played against him since. And he had a pretty good game. And, I felt a little bit of that weight, like I was letting the seniors down by losing my matchup. And I sort of vowed not to let that happen again for the rest of the year. So that was my individual moment of sort of a wake-up call or, motivation to really play my part for the rest of the season.
Gotcha. So what was the actual march through the tournament like? Actually, and this is your first time playing in the auditorium, right? So your sophomore year is the first time getting to play in the Bangor Auditorium in a tournament game. What kind of stands out from those games, your first experience? Because you guys, it was a home game for you guys. You guys packed the place. You go back and look at these videos and pictures, and it's ridiculous how many people they actually fit like on one side. So like, what do you remember actually your first tournament game as a player in there?
Well, I thought the coolest thing was we played Waterville the first game in the quarterfinal, and I didn't even know how big a deal the quarterfinal actually was. So they had the cheerleaders made the banner that we run through and all of that stuff. That felt pretty good. The game itself was a ho-hum game. It wasn't that close. We took care of business. With the number 1 seed going into it. The only loss we had all year was that Nokomis loss. So we felt pretty comfortable with all the local teams. We hadn't seen Waterville yet that year, but we handled them pretty easily. Then we played Nokomis the next game. And the thing I should mention is Joe Campbell was the best player at all 5 positions on our team. We didn't play against another team until we played Deering that had anyone close to him. It boggles my mind that the kid didn't have Division I offers. He had 0 offers actually throughout his senior year. He walked on at Maine and eventually did really well. Not eventually, right away. He did really well and earned a scholarship, but he had no scholarship offers coming out, and he was a tremendous player. So we rode Joe all season more or less. We played Nokomis in the second round. We played Skowhegan in the third round, and that was a battle. They had a diamond and 1, box and 1 that they played on Joe. They didn't let him get the ball. He really struggled. The rest of us, I think we took it personally that they played box and 1 against us, and we didn't perform our best either. We didn't make shots. We didn't put the ball in the basket. We didn't help Joe out. And that came down to, I think it was like a 2 or 4 point game. And Deering was at the game. They left at halftime. We were so bad. It was embarrassing. So they must have thought we were terrible, and they were going to just crush us a week later in the state championship game. So that was the tournament experience. And the games were packed, and we played hard. We just didn't play that well in that Eastern Maine final game.
So what was the build-up to the state game? Because Deering probably had the 2 best players in the state, right? They had Jamal and Nick. And then you mentioned you guys didn't play that well getting to the state title game. So I remember the game itself, but I don't remember the build-up. Like, what was the build-up going into it? Was it Deering was just going to steamroll you guys, or was Deering just favored, or what was the build-up?
Yeah, I think they were undefeated to that point in time. They hadn't had a close game. Maybe Westbrook gave them a game, once or twice during the season. and those guys, they sort of just walked through the season.
Yeah.
And we had our battles. We won every game but one. But we were definitely tested throughout that year. People would come in. Tim Throgmorton came in. He's the local reporter up in Bangor.
Legend.
Yeah, absolute legend. Great guy too. So he was walking the halls with us one of those days, and he was like, I'm hearing a lot about how much they're going to beat you by. People think it's going to be 20, 25. And I was just like, hey, we got to play the game. Let's get out there and we'll see. We knew that we were going to be outsized. So, they started, Nick is 6'7" or 6'8", whatever he is. They had another guy, Castarella, who was 6'6", and Jamal was 6'5" or 6'6". And we had one guy who was over 6'1". So we had to change a lot going into that game. We hadn't played zone for a possession all season. We played zone for the first 3 quarters of the Deering game. We played a 2-3 zone the first 3 quarters. We hadn't pressed all season. We had to press in the fourth quarter. So there were things that we were able to execute practice and execute over the course of a week that we didn't have in place prior to. We had worked on zones, we had worked on pressing here and there, but we'd never used any of it. So it's just, another testament to Coach Reed and how he can adjust depending on the opponent, and how he can teach players to execute in a short period of time. It's really impressive.
What was the mindset throughout the game? Because you guys were hearing that people thought that Deering was going to kind of roll you guys over. Were there any nerves going into it, or did you guys feel confident going into it that, no, like we're going to show up to play and we're here to win type thing? Like, what was the feeling?
Yeah, so I wasn't I know the seniors weren't nervous. I wasn't nervous about Deering. I wasn't nervous about the crowd. The crowd was huge. And it was one where the girls' game before us, there were a lot of people there. And the Nokomis, even though we had a rivalry with Nokomis, it was sort of a friendly rivalry.
Yeah. So
the Nokomis fans, they wanted us to win. They stuck around. So the gym, there was this great energy in the gym. And the auditorium, there's going to be energy if there are 15 people in the gym. So I wasn't nervous about any of that. It was still just the don't let these guys down. Those were my jitters. And so I don't know if you noticed the tip, that all the jitters went away when Coach Reed had me line up to take the opening tap against Nick, which, I didn't even jump. But it was so comical to me that I was standing there in front of him, that all the jitters went away, and it was just basketball from there.
And then also you mentioned the senior leadership, and I've had the opportunity to play with Joe on some men's league teams and stuff like that. Won a championship with Joe in the Bangor Summer League. Shout out to Joe. But I'm guessing he's just like the calm, cool, collected guy, right? Like he never really showed nervous energy or anything like that. I'm guessing he was like the common presence on that team, right?
He's very steady.
Yeah.
Very steady. I'd only seen him get fired up a couple times. And when I say he was steady, I don't mean it in a soft way. Joe was a tough dude, but in his own way. He wasn't going to bully people. He wasn't going to talk to people. He was just a tremendous leader in the way that he did it. He wasn't extremely vocal, but vocal enough. So yeah, and I think the other seniors too. They had all won in other sports too. We had a very good team. So for people to tell us we were going to lose by 20, we're surprised because we had these great athletes. This guy Josh Johnson, he was a football, basketball player. I think he played baseball too. He went to Princeton and played lacrosse. We didn't even have a lacrosse team at that. Joe Venetestein, football quarterback, basketball, baseball, state champ. He went on to play football at UMaine. Jim Shea, soccer player, basketball player. Jim went to Bowdoin and played soccer at Bowdoin. So we had really good athletes who were tough and strong and physical. And we knew that it was going to be a game, and we knew we were going to at least battle. And, in a close game, it can go either way.
Which it did. So let's get to the final possession here. I was watching this game as a kid. This was 2001. So I was a 14-year-old. I remember watching that game. And, so couple crazy things, right? So you guys get the ball down by 1 with like 20 seconds to go. Joe makes a move, gets ripped. Guy, I don't know who stole it from Darren, but dude from Darren starts taking off. Then you rip him, right? Mm-hmm. And then this is the question I got to ask you. Was it a shot or was it a pass?
It's funny. I get that question quite a bit, and
it's spot on as a pass. I mean, it's almost like
I couldn't have made a better pass.
Yeah,
it was 100% a shot. It was 100% a shot because at the time I got control of the ball and looked up, Joe was still on the ground.
Yeah,
he was still on the ground. He had just gotten up. There was no way I was going to be able to get it to him. I wasn't thinking about getting it to him. You lose track of because Joe, Coach Reed always teaches this. Joe committed a cardinal sin on our last possession. He did a spin move in the middle of the court. On Coach Reed teams, no one spins in the middle of the court because exactly what happened to Joe happens when you spin in the middle of the court. Someone comes from the backside and takes it. So I went and got the steal. Joe falls down. I throw it up. It was a Hail Mary. It's interesting because in two of my biggest moments in high school basketball, I shot an air ball, and I had a terrible turnover against Chevrolet my senior year with the clock winding down with a tie game in the fourth quarter. And both of those moments ended up in wins. So it didn't end so poorly. And, it was a desperation shot.
Did you know how much time was on the clock, or did you just get it and shoot it?
I knew it was under 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I knew it was under 5 seconds. But, just to be in that position, because Deering made a tremendous run in the second half of that game. We beat them up pretty good in the first half. I think we were up 25-10 or 25-11, and we were just rolling. Jamal couldn't hit a shot. I think Nick had a couple fouls. Nick got a terrible whistle that game. I remember that. He wound up fouling out. He wasn't even in the game at the end. They changed their defense up a little bit in the second half. They made a great comeback. They hit a bunch of shots. This guy, Derek Raymond, was on fire. I think he hit 4 threes in the second half. And at the end of the game, we were down by 3 with a minute left. It was 56-53. And Joe Venetestein got fouled shooting a 3. So we're here feeling like we're in a good spot. We got one of our senior leaders on the free throw line down by 3. Misses the first one. All right, fine. We'll be down by – misses the third one. Misses all 3. We're down by 3 with under a minute, and they're running the time down. So then you start to worry a little bit. And then Frank Core calls a timeout. The Deering coach called timeout. We got a chance to go see Coach Reed. We got our instructions for the rest of the game. And then, the rest is history. We fouled. They missed a free throw. Nick fouls out. Joe Campbell hits 2 free throws to put us down 1. We get a big steal out of the press. We decided not to foul with – I don't know what it was, 20 seconds left.
Yeah.
We didn't foul down 1. We get the steal, and then we have that crazy play at the buzzer, and Joe hits the reverse layup as the buzzer's going off, and there's mayhem after that. It was quite the experience.
Yeah, for anybody that has never seen it, they got the full game up on YouTube. You can check that out. It's crazy. And I was just watching it. I was telling you before we came on, I wanted to go watch it real quick just to have it fresh in my mind. And the craziest thing from that, I mean, the shot itself is crazy, but the thing that just stuck out, you mentioned the mayhem. Like, everyone just starts spilling out of the crowd. It looks like a zombie apocalypse movie where you just see like this horde of people just jumping over each other, trying to get to the court. Did you guys get jumped on? Did you guys get swallowed up?
Oh yeah, it was hard. It was hard to breathe. That was a dangerous scene.
Yeah.
And what I had heard about that actually was all the cops and the security had moved over to the Deering side. After the free throws were missed.
Yeah.
So they weren't prepared for our fans to storm the court in that way. So they got on pretty easily.
Yeah. What do you remember most from the celebration? Like, did you guys have like a parade? I don't even know how you guys celebrate in Bangor. There's a lot of championships that are won here. So.
Yeah. So let's see. It's funny. I remember the football state championship celebration more than the hoops one. Obviously there were parties afterwards. And what was funny is I think the daring party got busted and the Bangor one, they let go. Yeah, I don't think there was any huge celebration. I think we got together in Red Berry and, they did a little gold ball presentation. We definitely were feeling the love around town. It was a great moment for Bangor as a community. It wasn't just the boys basketball team. To this day, if I, go back and I'm hanging out, people are bringing up that game and, giving me crap about my afro and
what a time to be alive.
Yeah.
Things weren't as great the next year, right? So you mentioned all the seniors on that team that won the gold ball your sophomore year. Come back in junior year. It's pretty much just you, right?
So we had a bunch of guys who didn't play much because we had all those seniors,
right?
Who were asked to play big roles my junior year, and I was asked to do a lot more my junior year, and I prepared tirelessly for that. So I went from a 5 points per game guy to or thereabouts. The other thing you got to know about Bangor is none of us know our stats. They don't tell us. We don't, track it. I don't know how many points I scored in high school. It's all about winning. It's all about winning. I don't know if they do it now, but that was just the way it was. I just knew I had to score. So, I spent the summer getting shots up. I didn't have a trainer. We didn't have trainers then.
Yeah, a little different back then.
The cool thing was to, not let anyone know you're doing the work and show up and, hit a bunch of shots and, have your handle be tighter and people be like, whoa, he's really good now. So that was my goal. I didn't want people to know that I was, getting 500, 1,000 shots a day, and getting my own rebounds and tracking my makes and misses and all that stuff. I found some local courts. Sometimes the guys would be playing, sometimes they wouldn't. And, I'd get my work in, spend a few hours and then get home.
Real quick on that. I want to ask you, like, where were you getting runs in back then? Where were the places to get runs in Bangor?
Oh man, I think I had one place on the I guess it's the east side and one place on the west side, 17th Street. There was a place over by the hospital. I forgot the name of that court.
Newberry.
Yeah, Newberry.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
So those are my two spots.
Yeah. Okay. So you put a ton of work in that summer. Come back your junior year, a lot more responsibility.
Yep.
And then you guys also have the unfortunate pleasure of running into another great team, another great player. That's when Brunswick won a gold ball, right? So
we were middle of the road that year. I think we got the 8 seed. Or they did it so that it was 1 through 4 and 1 through 4.
Yeah, it was weird that I took a look at it. It was like north and south, and then I don't know how they did it that year, but you guys played Brunswick in the first round.
That's right. And so we had scrimmaged Brunswick the year prior in the preseason, and we beat them. And they had this kid on the bench. You don't see a whole lot of brothers on the team. At least at that point in time. I know we're a little bit more diverse up there now. And so Ralph is sitting there on the end of the bench the whole game the year before. He was a freshman. And I'm like, I've never seen him, didn't know him. And why is he on the end of the bench? End of the game comes around. They're down by, 15 or 20 or something like that. They didn't play particularly well. They also had Dan Hammond, who was a tremendous player.
Right.
So Ralph comes in, and I'm watching him play, and I'm like, that kid shouldn't have been on the bench all game. What was he doing? So the next year, they just run through Eastern Maine. They made the switch from Western Maine to Eastern Maine that year, which would be my junior year. And so we faced them first round of the tournament. And, you know, we had played some tough games. We were competitive. We thought we had a chance. And they gave us a pretty good beat down. But that was one of the moments where I showed I could do, you know, whatever it was that the team needed. I think I had 2 points in the first half, and we were down by 20 at halftime. I think I had 20 points in the third quarter of that game. And it was 18 or 20, something like that. At the end of the quarter, Dan Hammond comes up to me, and he says, "You're not effing beating me. I'm guarding you the rest of the game." Dan Hammond, you know, he's 6'5", doesn't play point guard, hounds me the whole fourth quarter. The whole fourth quarter, they end up beating us by 20 or 30. But it was one of those, you know, sort of helpless feeling beatdowns that we got. And it stuck with me throughout the course of the junior to senior year off season. And it was definitely a motivating factor in you know, what would transpire the next year.
Yeah. So what did you work on to go into that senior year? Was it just get better all around? Was it add something specific to your game, or what was it that you added, or how'd you attack it?
It was strength, you know, continue to make the jump shot better, work on my left hand. I had a reputation of only going right. And it wasn't because I couldn't go left. It was just because I didn't go left.
Yeah.
I was able to go right, so I went right. So, you know, diversifying my offensive game a little bit, and getting stronger physically as well. Those were the main things I focused on. And then, you know, we had a really good AAU team. I had a blast with those AAU teams. You know, Ryan was one of my best friends, my biggest competitor and one of my best friends. You know, we go at it in practice. We go at it in PlayStation games. We go at it, you know, obviously in the Bangor Nokomis games. And then off the court, you know, we were thick as thieves. We had some really good times on and off the court. And, you know, nothing but respect for that guy. My toughest win was beating him in the playoffs in the tournament my senior year. That was really difficult. Just to know what he had put into it, and for him not to advance was a really tough moment for me from a personal perspective. I haven't had a win that didn't feel good, especially a big win.
Yeah.
that didn't feel good afterwards, other than that one.
So it sounds like you were very goal oriented. You went into off seasons wanting to get better at this, and I'm guessing that extended to what you had planned for the season, right? So you mentioned wanting to go out a certain way your senior year. What were some goals you set?
Yeah, well, yeah. So look, I always tracked where people were, you know, ranked. And going into high school, I wasn't considered. And then slowly I was in the consideration, and then going into senior year, you know, I was thought of, you know, like maybe a top 5 guy, but not number 1. And in my head, I was number 1 at that point. Like, I should have been number 1. Maybe Ralph was better. But you know, I had a lot to prove sort of personally, but the only way to prove it personally for me was to win. Because I wasn't going to score more points than Ryan. I wasn't going to score more points than, I don't know who else. Jeff Holmes was in the I wasn't going to score more points than Ralph. A lot of the things that I do are sort of under the radar. You know, I feel one of my strengths at that point in time was being able to make the people around me the best version of themselves. So understanding the strengths and the weaknesses of different players, giving them the ball at the right point in time. You know, understanding who I'm playing against, the strengths of those players, where my guys might need help. Sort of the game within the game was one of those things that I really prided myself on. And some people noticed it, some people didn't. So the you know, proving that I was elite was one of the things. The second thing was I thought that even though we were sort of the underdogs, we weren't supposed to be a great team my senior year. We were undersized. Hamden was really good. Nokomis was really good. And obviously Brunswick was supposed to be the juggernaut, right? And we had three of our starters going into the season. Two of them quit the team. One was 6'5", the other one was 6'4", which left us with one person 6'4". Everyone else was under 6 feet, except Wes Day, who was a 2-guard. He was about 6 feet. So we were tiny. We ended the season with only 2 starters that started the first game of the season.
Jeez.
We had 2 sophomores who were both under 6 feet starting. And we had a center who was 5'11". And he wasn't even in the rotation in the first week of the season. Yeah. He was like the 10th or 11th man. He was a wide receiver on the football team. And so we just weren't supposed to be that good that year. Wes had transferred in, which gave us a big boost. Wes was a really good shooting 2-guard who could do a little bit of everything on the floor, and was a really good teammate and team player. And he bought into the Bangor way of doing things right away. But we weren't supposed to have a chance that season.
You guys finished as a 2 seed somehow.
Yeah. And what it was our sophomores who weren't in the starting lineup to begin with, Aaron Gallant and Jordan Heath, who both went on to play college hoops. One went to Tufts, one went to Husson. Those guys grew up in a matter of weeks. So, Aaron wound up playing a huge role, making some really big shots at big moments. And Jordan was tough. He was they both sort of adopted my way of approaching things. They were just really hard-nosed. They weren't backing down to anyone. They were, under your chin on defense. They were slapping the ball away, pesky all the time. And they were good athletes. And what we were able to build was a defense that was impenetrable to a certain extent. And rotated really well. We were on a string. We understood the rotations, and we understood when to double, when to triple when we needed to, and how to get back. And so we were able to grind out some really impressive underdog wins throughout the course of that season. A lot of great, last minute wins that sort of paid off for us when it came tournament time.
We talked about earlier when you were a sophomore and Joe was the senior, and what kind of leader he was. What kind of leader were you once you were in that role? Clearly the team is yours by then. How would you define your leadership style?
I was obsessed with winning a state championship that year. And the only way that I could do it was to embrace all of the guys that I had. And, there was no one new walking through the door. So you figure out, what everyone's strengths are, what they need to hear, whether they need to be built up or whether they need to be kicked in the butt. And I sort of took a coach's mentality to that season. I sort of put my own aspirations aside. I scored less my senior year than I did my junior year, a lot less. And it was because what the team needed was a leader, not a scorer. Those guys could score. Jordan could score. He was a shooter. Aaron Gallant, he could score. Wes Day could fill it up. We needed a floor general and someone who was going to win games. And if I needed to take over, okay, fine. And if we need a, hoop at the end of the game, all right. But I didn't need to dominate games that year. And so when I say I was obsessed with getting a championship, it was I wanted my own. Like that sophomore year one, that was Joe's. That was those seniors. And I was another guy on the team. I played my role. And, I didn't come out of that game, but that wasn't my team. I was a sidekick. I wanted to win one as a leader. And so that was my obsession.
Okay. So you go in as a 2 seed. I got it right here. Lawrence in the first round, kind of breezed through Lawrence. Then you mentioned the Nokomis game in the second round.
Yep. I almost got arrested before the Lawrence game.
Is there a story behind this?
Yeah. So we went down to scout them, and the gym was packed. They played Skowhegan, and obviously I had a lot of friends on the Skowhegan team because I played AAU with them.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let us in the gym to scout because they were past the fire code, but they were letting these families sort of trickle in through the doors from the lobby. And so I hung around trying to get in, and and I couldn't understand why they were letting the families in and not me. Like, to me, I had family in there too, with the Skowhegan guys. But so they brought the cops out, and the cops asked me politely a few times, and then not so politely a few times.
Yeah.
With a few threats mixed in there. A few days before the game. So we handled Lawrence, needless to say, and I had a little extra motivation to take him down.
Yeah, this is all kinds of great stuff. This is stuff you can't find on the internet right here. So this is good. And then the Nokomis game, the game against Ryan in the semis. Anything else you want to say about that game? I mean, you mentioned just what it meant to you on a personal level.
Yeah, right. So that was one of those games where we came out firing. I think we hit, 6-7 shots straight to start that game, and we blitzed them. And then Ryan, being the great competitor and player that he was, put on a show during the second and the third quarter, I think. He hit some bombs. He must have been shooting from 35 feet out. There was a point in that game, so I was guarding him. He threw a pump fake up from the circle, somewhere around the circle. And at that point, he had hit, 3-4 in a row, and I had to jump at it. And he was standing flat-footed, but that was the sort of, momentum that he had. And some of those shots, I mean, it looked like they were in the air for 3-4 seconds.
Yeah.
And just the velocity that they had coming through the net was was really impressive and stands out to me. So he had quite the game. I played okay. I made a few good plays down the stretch. And also a few mistakes that stand out. It's funny, I think a lot more about the mistakes that I make than the good plays.
Right.
The turnovers really stand out. I remember in your interview with Nick, he mentioned a couple dead spots on the auditorium floor. And then deep in the fourth quarter in a close game, I hit one of them and got a backcourt call against me on just a sort of routine play. And it was a pretty embarrassing moment, but I was able to rebound. The thing about Coach Reed is he really instilled in us moving on to the next play. So, whatever happens. It's in the past. What can you do next? And we were able to get a steal, and, I kicked it out to West for a 3-pointer when we were down by 2 with, I don't know what it was, 10 seconds left. So there were some late game heroics, and then, Ryan had a tough turnover at the end of the game. And so, hated to see him go out with a turnover to finish it.
Yeah.
It would have been nice if he had just missed a shot and sent me on my way that way.
Yeah. But I'm guessing you're going to take the win, right? You're going to take the win and move on. And then Brunswick. So Brunswick's the defending state champs. Ralph Mims had to have been heavily favored in that game, right?
Well, I think Ralph scored I think he was averaging 35 or 40 points in the tournament in the 2 games leading up to that. And he had a good team around him, a solid team around him. And he looked unstoppable. And we had played them earlier in the season. We played them in the preseason, and they beat us by about 20. And we made some significant changes leading into the game in terms of matchups and our approach to the game. We were much more prepared for their press, which really bothered us earlier in the year. And not to mention, we had a different team. The team that we played them with was completely different. But we put Wes, who's taller than I am, he's about 6 feet, maybe 6'1", on Ralph. And I guarded this guy, Nick Pelletier. I think his name's Nick Pelletier. And Pelletier was more of a wing player, cutter, mid-range shooter type. And, Ralph was the, do all things, fill it up. And Wes's job was to bother him, to keep pressure on him. And the rest of our jobs was anytime Ralph got inside the three-point line, we sell out and we close the gap. Because one of us alone wasn't guarding Ralph. It just wasn't going to happen. And you saw it the next year when Portland tried it in the state final game, and Ralph went off for whatever it was, almost 50.
Yeah.
So we ended up doing a really good job bottling Ralph up. I think he shot 4 for 20 or something like that for the game. He had a really tough time because he couldn't get anything around the hoop. And Wes did a good job contesting the threes. Aaron Gallant had a stint on him. Aaron was a sophomore at the time guarding Ralph, so it was a big task. And actually, Drew Pelletier, not Nick Pelletier. Drew Pelletier, he scored a few points on me in the first half, and so I switched onto their point guard in the second half. And really bothered him. I think that changed the game. So we put someone else who was taller than I was on Drew. And, I think in the beginning of the game, Brunswick really sort of asserted themselves. And they jumped us early. First couple buckets. But we fought back. We were able to break the press a little bit, and we got a little bit of momentum. That was one of those games where I felt the game sort of slipping. We needed a boost. So I had to score a couple times, and then I got back into the facilitating mode as the game went on. But the Brunswick team was really tough, really fast, and we had our hands full with Ralph. That first half, I think the game was tied at halftime. It was a close game. Second half, we come out, we make a couple adjustments, and we go on a huge run to end the third quarter. And I think we were up by 12 at one point in time. Everything was going right for us. I had scored a few times. It was funny. When Ralph was guarding me, I didn't really go at him. I didn't challenge him. And then the second I felt his attention slip, that's when I had my opportunity to put the ball in the basket a couple times. And then towards the end of the game, they switched and they put someone else on me, and I was able to get a couple more buckets. So it was one of those things where I had to pick and choose my times to go at them. And we held on down the stretch. They made a run. Ralph hit a couple shots, and we had an answer for them every time. That was one of those games where, the Deering game could have gone either way. This game wasn't going either way. There was no doubt about it. We were the better team that night. Whether or not we were the better team in general or if it had been a series, I don't know. But we were definitely the better team in that Eastern Conference final game.
That's all you got to do. You just got to win one in a tournament game. So you guys get past Brunswick, but you still got one more game to get a championship, right? So you got to go through Chevers. Was the state game in Bangor or was it down in Portland?
That state game was in Bangor as well because
your last game was at home.
Years.
Yeah.
So we were back at home.
Okay. So what can you tell me about the state game? Because I just know about the Brunswick game. I know you guys played Chevers, but I don't know how it actually played out. Yeah,
so they had Jeff Holmes. They had Austin DeAngelis. They had Max Simpson, who went to so Austin went to Emory down in Atlanta. Max Simpson went to Colby, and Jeff Holmes went to Bentley. So they had a good team, and they had some bench guys who were pretty strong and athletic as well. And obviously they had a great coach. And that game was a chess match. It was a grinded out in the 40s. I think the game ended in the 40s, and it was an overtime game. So it was very well played, but it was very slow. They played this matchup zone all game, and they had played it all season. That was really tough to figure out. If you didn't beat it down the court, it was almost like solving a puzzle, scoring against it. They made it really tough to score, and we had really long possessions, and they did too. We had to triple team Jeff Holmes when he caught the ball in the post. He was a beast. And what I remember most about the game is that turnover I was telling you about. It was a tie game with 30 seconds left, and their whole team was looking at their coach for commands. I had controlled the end of each quarter up to that point in time, and we got really good shots out of it. I think we scored at the end of every quarter. And so things were looking pretty good. And I felt like the game was over, dribbling the ball at half court, holding it for the last shot. It just felt like we had it. They diverted their attention. I tried to sneak a pass in to one of my teammates under the basket. Teammate wasn't looking for it. Ball goes out of bounds. Turn the ball over. Tie game. 20 seconds left in the state championship game. And so, you have to erase that, go out and get a stop. I tried to take a charge on DeAngelis and wound up hitting the ground. He was forced to take an off-balance jumper, and it didn't even come close to going in. It was a huge relief. We went into overtime. We hit some big shots and wound up winning by 4. Yeah. We were definitely tested. And, we felt that in every game in the tournament except the first round, we definitely had that chip on our shoulder, like we were the underdogs. And we played like it. We were absolutely tenacious in, each one of those games. And we were playing with guys who at the beginning of the season didn't even think they were going to be, factors. And they wound up playing huge roles for us. So it was an incredible accomplishment to win a state championship that year with that team, with the things we had to overcome and the adversity that we faced.
And that was your championship, right? That was your championship team.
And that one was mine. That one was mine. And I'm sure those guys who were sophomores felt as though, they didn't want to mess it up.
Yeah. So, we just pretty much recapped the entire high school career, and there's a lot of big games that you got to play in, and not all of them were state championship games. We talk about the Brunswick game, games like that. Yeah. Is there one game that kind of sticks out the most, looking back on it, like it's the most special one?
The most, out of all of them, or one that we haven't talked about?
It could be, yeah, maybe even one we haven't even talked about. Just one game, when you look back, is there one that means more than the others?
Yeah, well, the Deering one is the greatest team accomplishment that I've been a part of. That one was, against all odds. And, we could have folded. We could have made bad decisions at the end of the game. After we missed those free throws, it easily could have been over. And when you listen to the broadcast, the commentators were speaking as if the game were over.
Yeah.
So that from a team perspective, that's a big one. From a personal perspective, there were a couple. We're down by 1 against John Bapps my sophomore year, my sidekick year, with about 14 seconds left. I told the team I was going to get a steal to win the game in the huddle coming out of the timeout. The ball gets inbounded. I steal the ball. I lay it up with 3 seconds left to win the game. That was a big one for me. And then in college, the individual one would be 9 points in a minute against Colby, come back from down 7 to tie it up and win the game in overtime. That was and especially against a rival like Colby. And I always had it out for them because I thought Whitmore should have recruited me. Yeah. And I worked for him. I worked for him for a bunch of years, and I went to his camps.
Yeah.
So, I was surprised because I had all these Division III schools that were looking at me, and some Division I and some Division II. But I probably would have gone to Colby.
That's what I wanted to ask you. That's something else I wanted to get to is how you came down to deciding on Bates. Like, when did school start looking at you? What was the process like? How'd you narrow it down? And we just found out why you didn't wind up at Colby, but how'd you wind up at Bates?
Yeah, well, no one in my family had been to college. I didn't know anything about a recruiting process. Coach Reed was hands off when it came to that stuff. And I was getting letters from the time I was a freshman. They sent letters back then. And I was getting so many letters that, or sophomore, I guess. I went to Eastern Invitational a few years, and coming out, which was a camp down in New Jersey, where, a lot of college coaches go and you get some exposure. And so I was getting, I made the all-star teams and most improved player and all that stuff. So I was getting quite a bit of interest, and I was throwing out any letter that wasn't handwritten. Like I was absolutely clueless. If it looked generic, then I didn't pay it any mind. And so I threw out a lot of stuff I probably shouldn't have. So what it came down to was this, and maybe that was the right approach to take, because, I did develop really good relationships with some coaches. And Joe Riley was one of them, the head coach at Bates. Another one was Hank DeSantis at Northeastern. I really wanted to go to Northeastern, but the only issue was they had a player there, JJ Barea. He went by Jose Juan at that point in time.
Yeah.
Where the coach basically said, look, we can redshirt you for a year, but you're going to have 3 years where you're playing behind this guy. And a lot of the other Division I coaches, it was interesting that they asked who else was actively recruiting me, not just had sent letters. And so when you give them the list, it's not that impressive. And it takes a bigger leap of faith. Liberty really liked me, Binghamton, but they ended up going with other guys. So when it came down to making a decision between the Division III schools, it was Bates and it was Bowdoin. Bowdoin actually pursued me more for football. I had a bunch of football interests from like UNH and there were some other schools in there. But I didn't want to play football in college. So I wound up visiting Bates and Bowdoin, and Franklin Pierce offered a scholarship. So I went and visited Franklin Pierce. And then there was a Division II school, Livingstone College, which is an HBCU, that offered me as well. But between Bates and Bowdoin, I just had a better feel on the Bates campus. I went to see a game and they didn't play well. Bowdoin beat them. The Bates guys didn't have the greatest attitudes, but I trusted Coach Riley. And that's what obviously the school was a great school. Those were the two things that I based my decision on when it really came down to it. And, I liked Bates enough, the education and the coach, to pass up on Division II scholarship offers. And it was really tough passing on the Franklin Pierce one, given my buddy Ryan McClellan wound up taking the one that they offered him. So
we're going to breeze over the college years a lot more quicker than we did with the high school.
Oh, yeah.
But real quick, looking back on the Bates years, I mean, you mentioned that one game that kind of stands out, but nothing wrong with D3 hoops, especially here in New England. Some great hoops. It's a great hoop scene. What do you remember most, or what do you take away from your time with Bates?
Well, the level of play in the NESCAC. That conference was really tough night in and night out. There were no real gimmies. We were never able to beat the Amherst teams. One of my years, we got as high as, 10th in the country, 8th in the country. I think it was my senior year. And we just couldn't beat Amherst. They had 7 kids who wound up playing professional basketball that year. A lot of guys in that conference turned down scholarships to go play in the NESCAC. So there were some great players who played for Tufts and Amherst and Williams and Middlebury and Bowdoin. So that's what really stands out from those years. And, there were some great buzzer beating moments. I really love the end game scenarios. That was always a thing of mine, was, being able to execute at the end of games. And I know I mentioned a few of the mess ups that I had, but there were plenty of shining moments as well.
So I actually had an encounter with you during your time at Bates. You actually played in a tournament at Huston. I was at UMFK, and we actually played you guys in the opening round. And I knew you obviously from the game, from the Deering game and stuff like that. This is my first time seeing you in person, and I just have one takeaway. You were a lot quicker. You were a lot faster than I ever could have thought or imagined, but you guys handled us pretty easily that night. But, that's my only encounter I've ever had with you in the basketball court. But
Yeah. I remember the tournament. I apologize. I don't remember the game specifically, but I do remember that tournament because it was the only time I played in Bangor in my 4 years of college. So it was
I think Bangor knew it because it was a good crowd. It was a good crowd for a random tournament.
For a neutral site. Right.
Yeah. Right. But you have come back home and played a couple of times. We talked about the Noonan tournament too. So you had a chance to come back and win a couple championships with that. So what's it like coming back home? Obviously, you're probably not going to do it as often now where you can't right now, but was that something special to you to be able to come back like years later and play in Redberry and just be around former players and stuff like that? That must have to be something cool.
Oh, it was awesome. It was awesome because there was such a mix of guys from, our generation and the younger generation as well. And what was cool for me was, Nick Pilot played, he jumped on my team a few of those years.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I brought up guys that I've been playing with in Boston for the last few years. And we brought up some really good teams and some guys, who played in the Sweet 16 and the NCAA tournament. Some guys who are still playing professionally, to this day. And it was cool to see those guys compete and, get to meet, people I battled against or, they got a kick out of, seeing the younger guys come up to me and say, hey, I remember you from high school, this, that, and the other. Or, we'd be out at night and people would remember me and, these guys just see me as, another one of the guys. But those are some of the cool moments and just hanging out, after the games and catching up on Maine high school hoops, with whether it was guys who came after me or before me. The Noonan tournaments were really a highlight. It was very easy to get guys from down here to come up and go to those tournaments.
Absolutely. And it's growing. It's a great tournament that they put on. It's like the showcase of the summertime. Like when it comes to Maine hoops in the summertime, it's the place to be.
This past year was supposed to be our comeback year. But COVID got in the way. So, hopefully I can come out of retirement if we get it going again next year. But
it'd be fun. It'd be fun right there.
It'd be great to get back up there.
Absolutely. So before we get up out of here, I mentioned, and pretty much the theme throughout this episode has just been like the great teams and the great players that you had to battle up and go against during your time. So I'm just going to run through a bunch of names. Just give me your thoughts on these guys, just quick hitters on those guys as players, as competitors, just what comes to mind. So Joe Campbell.
Winner.
Okay. Nick Cantor-Medley.
He was supremely talented. He was the best player that I played against in my high school years. And it's funny, I listened to your podcast with him, and he mentioned a guy who the Pistons drafted over him. This guy, Will Blaylock. Will Blaylock and I battled for 3 years in AAU. And so Will and Nick were the two best players that I'd played against in my high school years. And it just so happens, he had a run-in with Will as well. Will, by the way, for a while, he was playing down here in Boston after his, NBA, G League stint. So I've been matching up with him and playing against him for years now.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What about Jamal Caterina?
So Jamal, skilled, I would say skilled. So all those guys, Nick, I became friends with. Jamal, I became friends with. Walter, I became friends with well after that state game. We've never talked about it. Not even mentioned it. So, I was hoping that you would ask Nick on the podcast about his thoughts on the game, just so I could hear one of their perspectives. But yeah, Jamal, he was really skilled. I wound up playing against him in college too. He ended up transferring to USM for a year. And he was just smooth, skilled, silky, and really is a pretty quiet guy.
Yeah. Nick Pilat.
Tough. He's tough. And the thing that surprised me playing more and more with Nick is how much of a team player he is. You know, you hear about all the points he scored in college, and you know, he was a really good scorer at Valley as well. But he doesn't have to dominate the ball. He moves it well. He thinks the game really well. His dad's a coach, so you know he has that great sort of basketball foundation, really good basketball IQ. He just happens to be a gifted scorer as well.
And you mentioned his name earlier, Jason Harvey. I wanted to ask you about him because I remember Jason from his Hudson days because he used to kill UMFK. So that's where I remember him from. But what would you say about Jason?
Solid. I don't think he didn't do anything particularly well, but he didn't have any glaring weaknesses. And that's what I remember about Jason's game. You know, I don't remember him being a great shooter. I don't remember him being a great scorer. He could shoot. He could score. Solid defender. Ran a good team.
And then we talked about him a lot already, but Ryan McClellan. I know Ryan from like men's leagues and tournaments like later on, like within like the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
He still comes out there and gets buckets. I can only imagine what he was like back in the day.
Ryan, those are some of my most fun moments. Were playing AAU ball with Ryan. Some of my best basketball memories came from playing AAU ball with Ryan. He was a savant when it came to putting the ball in the basket. I mean, he could do it, you know, left-handed without seeing the hoop, right-handed without seeing the hoop. He hit this one shot to put a game into overtime from behind the backboard, fading away, three-pointer in the corner, over the edge of the backboard, drops it in to push a game to overtime against us at Nokomis one year. I mean, he could just score in every which way. It sucked playing against. It brought out the best of me. And, you know, he'll tell you, you know, I would say I was probably one of the harder people he had to play against in terms of, you know, he had to up his game to a new level against me too. So that's why you would see him hit some of those shots that he was capable of hitting. And
then I'll end it with Ralph Mims. We talked about him a lot too, but what can you say about Ralph?
Yeah. So Ralph ended up being another teammate of mine. I was 17 when I went to college, so I played another year of AAU after my senior year, and I played with Ralph's AAU team. He was every bit of the big time player that he ended up being. And you know, his improvement every year, like he just added pieces to his game each year. He was so much better off the bounce as a senior than he was as a junior. His 3-point shot was so much better as a senior than it was as a junior. And he was really good as a junior. So, you know, that's what I remember most about Ralph. And also how much fun he was to be around. He was a good time. Really, really, you know, great personality, you know, jokester, you know, made you feel good about being around him.
I'm trying to get Ralph on, but my requests have gone unanswered so far. So Ralph, if you're watching, get back to me. I want to get you on big time. But did I miss anybody else from that era? Is anybody else, maybe someone we haven't talked about at all?
Man. Well, you know, some of my Winslow guys, there's a guy, Micah Grant, who wound up winning a state championship at Winslow. He was a really skilled player. I think he wound up being an all-state, Bangor all-state guy. Let's see. We had one of the guys you missed, Jason Height. We had some really good battles in AAU. We had like this northern Maine, southern Maine thing going for a bunch of years. Jason wound up, I think he did a PG year and wound up going to Maine. And he was a really tough player. But I think you hit most of them. Yeah, I'd say you did a pretty good job getting me to hit on most of those guys, and from my own perspective, all those guys are great, and I love competing against them, and I love finding ways to beat them. That was the biggest thing for me. I didn't need to out anyone other than win. That was my main goal, and I actually didn't think that I'd end up winning the Mr. Basketball that year. I thought it was going to go to Ryan, just because of the sheer volume that he put up. But it was just interesting that, and it was rewarding that people would value sort of the things that I brought to the game, without having to see me score, 40 points a game or 30
Absolutely.
points a game, whatever the number was. So, yeah.
Okay, I got one more before we get up out of here. Last one, I promise. I know you talked about like coming up through high school, looking at the rankings, wanting to be at the top, thinking you should be at the top. Obviously, finished there as Mr. Basketball. Is there one guy who you chase, like, man, I'm better than this guy, and he kind of fueled you to get better in the off season? Was that one guy you chased in your head at least?
Well, I think Ryan and I were always chasing each other.
Yeah,
we were always chasing each other. And it wasn't any there was no malice in it. I loved seeing him do well. I loved it. But I also wanted to beat him, and I also wanted to play better than him. And he was really the guy for me, when I was working out in Bangor, when I'd be at, 17th Street or at Newberry, I'm thinking about Ryan and what's Ryan doing right now and how hard is he working? Is he getting these reps up?
Is he still feeling your workouts right now? Or have you moved on?
I've moved on. I've got other people that are my targets these days. But if he were in town, I'm sure he'd still be on the on the hit list.
Before we get up out of here, I always give my guests a chance to say a final piece before we close it down for the night. Is there anything you want to say? Any last words to get up on the air before we get up out of here?
For me, the biggest thing for me was always to persevere. I was put in a lot of circumstances, personal and athletically, where things didn't go well for me, or, experiences weren't necessarily ideal. And, I think I did a pretty good job of always looking forward. And I think there are a lot of people out there who get too bogged down in the failures to be able to, bounce back and succeed. I think it's a really important characteristic. And, I mentioned a couple instances during our conversation, where, that sort of perseverance led to really great accomplishments. That would be one thing. I think another thing is just I'm so appreciative of all the help. Pills mentioned this. He gives back in the ways that he does because of the people that gave to him when he was growing up. And I was blessed to have a couple mentors, Roger Reed being one of them, who really helped show me the way. And I've taken that up here in Boston. I've got a bunch of kids that I worked with, from grade 8 to now they're, sophomores, juniors in college. And they've gone on to great places. It was just one of those things where I had that calling. I had that calling to give back in the way that people spend time with me. And just help people accomplish their dreams. And I hope that more people keep doing it. It's been great to see that, our generation of hoopers is so involved in Maine High School basketball today. I think it's really important to keep that tradition going.
Absolutely. And if Bangor ever came calling and said, hey, we need a head coach down the road, you going to answer that call and come back to Maine and come coach your alma mater? I always wanted to coach. And that would be an incredible experience to go back and coach at Bangor High School.
sometime down the road, if the stars align, I would be very proud to have been called upon and thought of in that esteem to be able to lead that program. So I have great memories of my time there. Very fond of the community, and would love to coach that team at some point in the future.
There we go. You heard it first on Big Time. Ladies and gentlemen, Zak Ray, 2-time state champ, Mr. Basketball, just all around good guy, and a great conversation. This was great. This is a lot of great stuff. So thank you for coming on tonight. I really
appreciate it. Hey, I'm happy to chop it up about the good times that I had there. So thanks for inviting me. It's been great talking to you.
Absolutely. It's going to do it for this week's episode. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you're checking out all the previous episodes. Wherever you get your podcast is up there. And we'll see you next week with another Big Time episode of Big Time Hoops, the podcast. Thank you.